An apple tree grew in a garden. This tree bore rotten fruit. From the moment the blossoms withered and the tiny apples began to grow, they were rotten. As they grew, the rottenness grew with them. They were bruised and soft and had a rank smell. Patches of skin were brown or black, and mildew and white fur grew on the patches. The crows loved this rotten fruit. They cawed and tore at it with their beaks. You would think that the man who owned the tree would have cut it down after first having had it examined to see what caused the fruit to rot and to find out how to prevent the disaster infecting other trees. But it was not so. The people of the village heard of the tree and came to see it. Its fame spread. Soon people travelled to it from far away. At the crossroads, signs were erected so that pilgrims should not lose their way. People prayed to the tree to punish their enemies and kill their rivals. They brought the sick to it. Crippled children, old blind people who were carried in litters and had not taken one step on the earth since they were born in it. Stories began to be told. A blind woman who had touched the bark saw, though a school of thought held that she had touched a root where it stuck out of the ground. A barrier was built round the tree so that the soil in which it grew should not be trampled to dust or mud. Guardians were appointed to stop worshippers removing twigs and pieces of bark. Relics were cut from the tree, but these were sold at high prices to potentates, rich merchants, and the intendants of cathedrals. The king sent pieces of bark to his allies as a special pledge of fidelity. Near the garden of the tree that bore rotten fruit, there was an orchard of apple, plum, and pear trees. These were cut down and burned, and the place where they had stood cemented over and used as a car park. Hotels were built, and trade prospered. The village grew into a town. Pictures and models of the sacred tree were sold in the shops, even in bread shops and greengrocers. Cuttings were taken from the tree and planted in special places where there were temples for worshippers and houses in which the keepers of the trees could live. This transplanting was carefully regulated. It was done so well that in a few years many places boasted their own rotten fruit trees. Indeed, one city boasted of a small orchard of such trees. This caused consternation in the town where the first tree had grown. But its owner was a wise man, and he told his fellow townsmen they had nothing to fear. The more rotten fruit trees there were, the more the mind of the nation would be turned on rotten fruit trees. And the more the mind of the nation was turned on rotten fruit trees, the more they would venerate the first rotten fruit tree. Even when it died and was replaced by one of its saplings, people would still venerate the spot where it had grown. His fellow townsmen saw the sense of this, especially as he added that there were, after all, enough people to go round. People began to be ashamed of apple trees on which good fruit grew. Wives complained to their husbands about them. Schoolboys threw stones at the windows of houses that stood in gardens where they grew. Crowds of drunken youths swung on their branches to break them. Residents' associations sent letters to those who grew and protected them. All over the country you could hear the sound of the axe. When the people had cut down the good apple trees, they cut down the good pear trees, good plum trees, and good cherry trees. They tore up the raspberry, canes, and gooseberry bushes. No one wished to be accused of protecting any tree, bush, or shrub that could be regarded as an insult to the great bearer of rotten apples and all the lesser bearers of rotten apples that had been grown from it. The day was made dark, and the night was made bright by the fires which consumed them. Action groups of tree fellers were trained in the expert use of axe and saw and hauling chain. They began to chop up furniture. First they chopped up furniture made of apple wood. Then, because it could be difficult to tell the tree from which the wood had come, they chopped up all wooden furniture. Next they chopped up wooden doors, wooden picture frames, wooden fences, and every other wooden thing except for rotten apple trees and their relics. A faker was arrested for sticking rotten chestnuts on a tree and claiming it to be the first rotten nut tree. After a spectacular trial, during which many women fainted and one woman threw a box of sawdust in the faker's eyes, and which the judge summed up in a voice that quivered as he described the danger in which he saw youth standing, the faker was condemned and shot by bow and arrow on National Rotten Apple Day before a great crowd of people who, as a sign of contempt for his heresy, had stained their faces, hands, clothes, and shoes with the pulp of rotten apples. They ended the day by dancing round a giant effigy of William Tell's son, with a replica of the historic rotten apple on his head. The fact that it was a rotten apple had been established by the researchers of the country's leading university. Music for the dancing was provided by a chorus of children dressed as apple leaves. The country is now in a state of high readiness. The people are dedicated to the worship of Old Pippin, as the first rotten apple tree has now declared itself, through the senior oracle, to be named. All Old Pippin's enemies dwell in fear. They are said to shake like aspen leaves. The government has declared it an article of religion and a fact of science that neither the leaves nor the branches of rotten apple trees shake. The arts of chopping with the axe and cutting with the saw are zealously taught in schools and felling institutions. Workers are required to practice felling for the nation for 1 hour a day after the end of their normal work. It is true that the nation has run out of trees, except for rotten apple trees, which of course may not be touched. It has even run out of wood, since the coffins were removed from churchyards in the special night actions. So there's nothing left to fell. But, as the leader of the action group said to a mass rally of fellers drawn from all parts of the country and with contingents from abroad, "We are loyal, devoted, trained, and eager for whatever our task may be. We stand ready with axe in hand. We merely await the order of our leader."